It is like one of the 5 beautiful days in New York City.
It actually has been perfect here for the past week. And as I like to say, California weather.
I mean, in New York, there's like a really nice week in spring and a really nice week in fall. And everything else is just humid or freezing. But it's beautiful today. And so I am here with you in my office.
You're like, so I locked myself up in a hot little box.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly. We're coming up to the end. I can't believe it's almost the end of the season. I don't have a book out this summer, so we don't have a sort of natural end of the
season.
Well, but everybody, we usually do end the season.
Well, I think we're going to end it this year by going back and doing one of your older books.
We're going to do Wicked and the Wallflower as the ender, the capstone of the season.
We started, the first time we did this was like with Brazen and the Beast, where that was like a book coming out, and we were like, oh, we could have a whole episode about one of Sarah's books. So we've done 2 of that 3 series, and we all know
lovely and also torturous.
You're completists, and so we're going to complete it.
So we're going to do Wicked and the Wallflower coming, but first we're going to do Devil of Downtown, which I think is next week. And what else?
Well, maybe you could say welcome to Fated Mates, everybody.
I'm Sarah McLean. I read romances and I write them.
And I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor.
And we're seeing each other next week.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I am going with Sun Hee to see Illinois, which is a dance show that was here in Chicago, and everyone loved it. And then it was like
stomp. Is it like banging around on stage?
No, I don't. People have said, though, even people who are not like big, like dance people, and I'm kind of not, were like, that changed my life, right? My friend Ernesto was like, it was amazing. And then it was sold out. Like, it was just like a short run here at Chicago Shakespeare Theater. And so then it was playing, actually, I think that Park Armory. Is that what it was? It was right when Fated Mates Live was, and that didn't work out because it was Fated Mates Live. So here I am in summer when things work out. Things work out for me in summer.
And then we are together again at Steamy Lit at the beginning of August, which we should probably tell everybody. If we're putting together a meetup at Steamy Lit for Fated Mates listeners, we're trying to figure it out. Follow us on things. Follow us on Twitter at Fated Mates, Instagram at Fated Mates Pod. If you're on the Patreon, you'll see it under Steamy Lit in events, in the events section. When we know what we're doing, we'll let you all know.
I think we will nail this down when we are together in a week or 2. So we'll know soon. I also have lots of plans to lay around and read romance novels. That would be
Well, I mean, last week's episode was really about us building our plans for the summer.
It sure was. And everyone else's too. You're welcome.
People were so excited. And I said to Eric, I was like, wait, we are discoverability. And he was like, yeah, you dummy.
It's true. And I think that what's funny is I think I'd said this last week, but like, I really enjoy doing that for our listeners, but I also enjoy doing it for me, right? Because it really forces me to like sort of look through and see kind of, hey, what is coming? Who are off? I mean, and often, it's been great. I hope we commit to making that a quarterly episode where we're really like, what's coming up this fall? What's coming up this winter?
Have you been getting emails from listeners? Me too.
Yeah.
Who are writers, are indie publishing, and who are like, hey, I have a book coming out. So thanks for following directions, everyone. And I love it. I'm reading all of them, and I'm marking them, and we're going to keep track. It's nice to know what's coming.
It is nice to know.
So Natalia, who is a listener who also hosts a podcast called Trigger Warning, which is, as you can imagine, about dark romance, messaged me and was like, I volunteer as tribute to do your like funeral home death romance episode, because Natalia obviously listens enough that she knows not for Jen. And so
I did not get this email, everybody.
No, I got it specifically. And she basically was like, I'd love to host with you. And I don't know if we're going to do that specifically because, not for Jen, but I actually suggested she come on and be a 5-minute Firebird on the Patreon. So I think she's going to join me for that. But she recommended this book she was like, please, please, please make sure you check the trigger warnings. Do not read this book like without checking the trigger warnings. And I appreciate that. Even though I am not a person who like needs a trigger warning at all. The book what she recommended was Dead Love by Audrey Rush, which is a sound. I did read the trigger warnings because she was so intense about like the warning, the warning about the warnings. And the thing that cracked me up about it, listen, is it's like a Hades and Persephone retelling, and he's a gravedigger, and it's like a stalker romance, and he's obsessed with her, and like there's whatever. If this is your thing, this is your thing. It sounds like, and in the warning list, it was like no cheating was like the first thing
Very
in the
clear,
warning.
a very
like,
clear part
just
of
so
the
that
warning.
everyone knows, no cheating, but there is a little like mummification in this romance, and I just died. I was like, it's wild to me that we're like, listen, mummification and coffin play is allowed, is fine, but I draw the line.
It really
Anyway,
does make
so
me
thanks
laugh.
so much, Natalia, for being a close listener and for offering to join me. I can't wait to have you as a 5-minute Firebird. So anyway, and if you're a dark romance reader, there's a podcast for you.
Okay, so in kind of prepping for The Devil of Downtown, which is happening next week.
Oh, by the way, what a fucking banger.
So good.
Joanna Shoup, what the hell? Why are you so good?
We love you.
Oh,
anyway,
Jack.
it's so good. He's so good, right? But one of my favorite things, and I will spoil this a little bit, I just won't talk about it next week, is Justine is the younger sister, right, of two older sisters who in the first two books wreak havoc all through Manhattan,
I know.
right? They are so judgy with Justine.
I know. Poor
and
Justine.
I remember being like, Joanna, like
justice for Justine.
Justice for Justine. And I don't have sisters, right? I only have two brothers. And so I remember asking Joanna, like, what the fuck is up with these two? Like and she was just like, that's how sisters are. And I was like, really? Because they were so judgy and so like, Justine, how dare you? And she kept being like, what the fuck? You, Florence, ran around town with Clayton Madden and are living in sin, running your fucking casino. And you're going to give me a hard fucking time about Jack Mulligan?
Going into a boxing club to have a talk with someone?
So anyway,
Jack Mulligan though.
And so it was
Jack Mulligan talks you pregnant. God. That's it. You don't even have to touch him. Boom, pregnant.
So anyway, we have talked about big families, like romance families, but we've never really kind of spent a lot of time. And we've talked about like a really infamous sibling trope, of course, is like best friend sibling, right? Like what happens. But we've never really talked about like when siblings are secondary characters, and those dynamics and how that can help like the characterization and like how that helps the story along in terms of like motive and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's kind of what's on the table today. But I will tell you something else that's funny, and maybe you have run into this problem. We've said many times that like one of the ways we kind of sometimes jumpstart our own thinking is to like Google like the lists, right? Like give me the list. And you know what you end up with? Lot of no, my friend. A lot of step sibling romance where somebody's fucking their stepbrother. And that's not on the table either.
That's not today's episode.
Have we done stepbrothers? I feel like we must have.
Listen, do I love a stepbrother? Of course I do. Because my faves are all real.
Because we're garbage and it's fine.
Complicated in there in my brain.
Right, sure. But so that was like the other part that I thought was really interesting is it was like even hard to kind of like sort through because, you know, you're essentially trying to find a needle in, you know, the frothy mountain of frothy ocean storm of like stepbrother romance.
You know, when we picked this episode, somebody had recommended after we did our, what do we do? Like older, like grandmothers and matriarchs. Somebody messaged us on Instagram and was like, what about like brothers and sisters, or what about siblings? And then for some reason, you and I talked about it separately. And I sort of thought initially, I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And then I went through a period where I was like, what am I going to say like about siblings in romance? Because oftentimes there's just there's a natural sibling kind of set, right? Where it's like, this is the series, it's about siblings, like they're all related. And so it's just like, well, now it's I think about like Bella Andre's Sullivan series, right? It's just like, I don't know, there must be 42 in that family. There are just a lot. There are a lot of siblings, and they like kind of float in and out of those books, but they are really there. The sibling is the like structure, the like skeleton that or the body the clothes hang on, right?
Right.
Um and so I think for me, what I was really thinking about here is like, what are the books where like the sibling relationship is as important, but like important in a really substantive way to the character arc of the protagonists.
And I think part of that is because, and I'm going to say this is like, we both have only children, but I am a teacher. And so I am really familiar with like watching kids come through my classroom where I've had their siblings, and they're all really different from each other, right? And we even have names for like sibling rivalry, or right, like the golden child is like the very good one, right, who is always, perfect, and then the other kids have to like live up to their, right, like, so we even have like names for kind of some of those relationships. And it is no joke if you have siblings, to like recognize and see how they, like, your relationship with them is so foundational to like how you operate in the world, right? And I think it's also, that can be especially true in romance, when you are watching people, in many cases, right, sort of like forming relationships that then illuminate their relationships with their family of origin in a different way, sometimes for good and sometimes for bad, right? And I think that is then like really interesting to me. And then sometimes it's like really direct, like, when I was thinking about your Scandal and Scoundrel series, right, which starts with like sisters that find their brother-in-law cheating on their sister, and how fucking furious they, right, like sort of that like urge to like rise up as Valkyries and defend her, and like that act is like a pinball that sets everything else in motion, right? And so I think that and this is true also of like Daring and the Duke, of like that series, right? Like you have all these, they were all literally born on the same day. I mean, from different mothers. I mean, so like I think understand.
I was trying to think. I haven't. It is very rare for me to write a character who does not have siblings.
Yeah.
And I think I'm gonna talk. I am gonna talk about my books right now, because I think one of the things that I was thinking about this morning as I was like thinking about what I wanted to say. For me, the sibling relationships that I have written in my books largely are fantasy. They are aspirational. I had a lot, I've talked about on the podcast, but I have a brother, or he passed away last year. When I was growing up, my brother was estranged from our family for a large portion of my youth. And I think through until about 5 years ago. And then he sort of returned to the family, and there was a lot of like work that we did as a family unit to like forgive and like move forward and sort of lay the past to rest and move forward. And I feel very blessed that in the final years of his life, like we actually ended up with a really great relationship, and he listened to the podcast, and like it was really nice. And I think that what's interesting to me about the way that I wrote for many years without with having a brother who was fairly estranged from my relationship, my life. And so I did write kind of aspirational brothers in I mean, from the jump. The Season, which is my YA novel, which we never talk about, um, that the protagonist there has like these very like wonderful brothers. Callie has this like great brother in Nine Rules. I wrote great brothers for a long time, and then I wrote some not great brothers, like, but brothers who always like kind of turn. There's always a sense of like siblings in my books are either good or they're like moving toward good. And I think for me that was very much aspirational. And I think I'm going to posit now that I am a grown up and I know a lot of people who also have siblings, like sibling relationships are really fraught. And we see this in romance. We see this play out in like, you know, the villainous the villainous sisters and brothers across romance, right? But I think one of the things we see romance negotiating with all the time. And I this morning I was thinking about in our sports episode, you said, "Oh, sports romance is the fantasy that men have friends."
Somebody said it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was you. And then I think that in romances with siblings, often the fantasy is that perfect sibling relationship that we're all sort of served up by media, like this is what it looks like when you're older and sisters are older and brothers, and like, and I'm not actually sure that many of us are lucky enough to have that relationship,
Yeah, well, and I
if that
think
makes sense.
so. It's interesting because I was actually like kind of poking around this morning because I was like, well, we have like this phrase sibling rivalry. Like, what are the other ones? And I just sent you this. Everybody, when you look down right now, you'll see what I've just sent Sarah in a text message, which is I found this this really funny graphic about like sibling relationships. And there's like two axes, right? And the bottom is sibling warmth. And then the like Y, I guess, axis is sibling hostility.
Mhm.
And so it's like if you are low warmth and low hostility, then what you get is uninvolved, right? And if you're like high warmth and low hostility, you get harmonious. But then like high hostility and low warmth, right?
Mhm.
And there was something, but the one that I thought was really interesting was like high hostility, high warmth is like affect intense, where you're just like really like wrapped up with
It's
each other,
too
right?
much. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that this was really useful because I do think that there's like a couple of like big sibling archetypes that happen in romance. And one is the one that you just pointed out, right? Which is like like the kind of idealized fantasy perfect sibling. I also think a really big one is it's essentially like, the prodigal son, right? Yeah, like I'm sorry to use like Christian mythology, but like
No, listen,
basically
that was
it's
my
right.
whole life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It's like the uninvolved one is we find them and like we bring them back in. Um, and then I think there's a really strong case for like sort of the younger sibling living in the older sibling shadow, or the younger sibling or a sibling who is like unnoticed, right? Like just like the family wallpaper sibling, right? And that often is a main character who then, right, the love interest sees them, right? And I was like using this as sort of a model. And I think and then sometimes you get the ones where they're like truly hostile sibling relationships. And then, right, and those can be interesting too. So I do think like it runs the gamut. Right. So I mean, I do, and so it was interesting because then, like, having that help me, like, kind of think about like books I might want to talk about. But I think the truth is, as you said, you already said this, but like, despite like the different sibling archetype relationships, I do think in romance they're all moving towards a better place. Maybe not completely settled, but a better place. Even if that better place is like one of the characters, like recognizing the limits of what their sibling can or cannot provide for them.
Exactly. I mean, I certainly think that's true in the sense of the large majority of siblings in romance are coded for readers as potential future heroes and heroines. And so I think even if you do have a situation where you have a hero or where you have a brother or a sister on page who is bad.
Right. Oh, yeah. We're like, okay, but they'll be good.
Yeah, we're sort of like, well, there is always the possibility that they'll be good because, and I think this again sort of is coded into our society, the way that media presents siblings to us, right? Is often like, well, if one of you is good, like if we are in love with the hero or the heroine of this book, surely there is some measure of him or her in the other.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Athon Books, publishers of The Concealed by S.K. Horton.
So our protagonist, Kate, is going to college. She's leaving Oregon and she's going to England for college. And she's, nervous and excited and ready for a little bit of culture shock. But when she gets to the university there, she discovers that she was not prepared for the culture shock that comes with suddenly discovering that you are the subject of a prophecy that requires you to defeat a ruthless magical enemy in a faraway land through a mysterious portal. And when you have to run through that portal because you're being chased by a bad guy and assisted by two irresistible young men.
Cute.
This is a YA romance tee-up that is one for the ages.
A classic for a reason.
Exactly. So this threesome, although I don't think it ends up being a threesome, everyone, this threesome falls through this portal and ends up like in this massive magical world with a imminent war and rival kingdoms, and Kate is the answer to all of it. She is the key to saving the day and saving the world, and she's falling in love at the same time, and she has complicated feelings, and this feels like a big, bold YA romance, like from the heyday of YA romance. And you know what's cool about this, Jen? I've been thinking a lot about over the summer, like finding a book that is a good read, buddy read with my daughter. And like maybe this would be perfect for a listener and their kiddo.
Yeah, so this is a great young adult romantasy full of court intrigue, first love, and found family. It is available in print, ebook, audio, and with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. If your podcast app supports it, you can tap on the chapter title to buy the book. Thank you to Athon Books and S.K. Horton for sponsoring this week's episode.
When I was growing up and I was reading romance voraciously in the 80s and early 90s, there was a real sense from books. Like I have a very vivid memory of a Stella Cameron book. Man, she wrote these like wacky, like contemporaries where where there were always like villainous, the villains were always brothers and sisters. Not the hero and heroine's brothers and sisters, but like they were literally like often pairs. Like they were a brother and a sister who together were villains. And they were like sex villains too. Like they all wanted to like do terrible sex things.
I recently read a non-romance, because everybody knows I will sometimes like detour into like the thriller verse. And there's a series called Orphan X by Greg Hurwitz, maybe I think is his name. And in one of these books, there was like a brother-sister pair who really, I was like, oh, I've seen these two in romance novels. Yeah. Like, right, they were evil.
It's like central
and,
casting evil.
Of course,
siblings.
Right? It was amazing. Yeah, I was like, oh, I'm enjoying this. Like going back to, you're just evil. It's fine.
I almost feel like what this episode is very much about like the siblings' relationship with the protagonist, but there's also like a separate episode maybe where it's like just about these brothers, like the brotherhood piece. But I think we have to talk about it because it is also like really talk about a real trope, right? Like a band of brothers who all get their own books, right?
Sure.
They're all like fucked up in the same way by the same father usually, right? And guilty for writing this, but like that sort of, again, fantasy of men having like a community outside of, a woman.
or that also like finding the love of their life is going to make them even better brothers, right? Like it's gonna be strengthening and empowering in some way they did not realize they needed, right?
Sure. It's like, and I mean, the person who installed this button for me, and I think this is, there are obviously a lot of old books that have siblings in them that like clearly installed buttons for me. But like, and we've talked about Elizabeth Lowell and the like Nevada, Tennessee, Utah group where like they're all like, they're set in the West, and each of these men has like, each one has had his own brutal, coming of age, growing into a man kind of moment. And they are all named for the United States. And they're all just, what's amazing though, is somehow she threads the needle of they are loners, they are rebels, they are brutalized, they can feel no love, they can feel no feelings, but also like they're all brothers and love
They're
each
gonna
other.
ride or die for their brothers. Exactly.
Right. And so it's fascinating and like pure fantasy. Like, I mean, just an electric wire into your id, those books. But so those are sort of for me. And then in each of those books, there is that kind of real micro trope that I want in every book with siblings or with this kind of relationship where the hero realizes that he has deeply fucked up and he is like ready. He is crawling over broken glass and he crawls to his sibling and the sibling is like, boy, you fucked up. Like, you're in love. Right. And that, like, the moment of clarity that comes in that is powerful. And often that's the flag of who's next.
Well, and as Sarah, I mean, do I dare bring up Benedict?
But I think that's the problem, right? So Benedict is Callie's brother and he's like a good dude. And readers really, really, really want his story.
20 years later or whatever, right?
20 years later. And I think it's because like he's essential to the growth of both of those characters in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Well, I like now straight up advise people. I was like, if you don't ever want to write this character's book, make it clear that they are married. Like, just
I have put a lot of wives on the page. And they're like they're like not even really on page.
It doesn't matter. They're just there to signal to the reader that this person is not getting a book. Yeah, right.
Well, lessons learned. That was my first romance. So should we start with, what do you want to start with?
Well, we've talked about, I mean, do you have anything more to say about any of your books or no?
I will just say that there is one of the books I am very proud of The Day of the Duchess for lots of reasons, but one of the things that I like the best about that book is there is a carriage scene in that book at the end, like in the third act, and it's a real wrap up. All the sisters are together. So the structure of that series is there are 5 sisters, and they are called the Soiled S's, and they are very scandalous, all but one. And they are they're new money and, they are at sea in society and they have each other and no one else. And one of those in the first book, Jen alluded to it, they stumble upon their brother-in-law, like, having or sleeping. I mean, he's fucking somebody in a garden and they punish him. And then their pregnant sister disappears. And she is gone for the rest of the series until the last book when she comes back and she's the heroine. And it's a marriage in trouble, like kind of second chance romance between the man who we saw in the garden in the first book and her. And there is a moment kind of late in that book where she's in the carriage, just her and the sisters, and they're mad. And they have this moment where they're like, but you left us too. And I'm very proud of that scene for a lot of reasons, but the main reason why I'm proud of it is because I think one of the lines I sort of, or the hurdles I cleared in that book in my career was the revelation that, like, in order to show growth of romantic characters, like, it's not enough that they grow in the eyes of each other. Like, they also have to grow in the eyes of, like, all the other people who they have harmed. And I mean, like, it seems obvious, but in that moment, I was like, this is it. This is how you show that a character has evolved. Like, it's not just for love. It's because of love. They are now a person who can acknowledge their flaws.
I mean, and here's the other thing I think maybe if you're like a newer comer to romance, you might not realize is like many early romances had people without families. Like it was like really a tighter focus on just like these people coming together as adults in their adult life. And and they had a family somewhere, but the family themselves was like no part of like the romance arc or the story or the plot. And so so like it's also great, I think, to have a way to show that growth, not just to the reader, but to the character themselves. Right. So like by having them realize like, oh, I'm changed, I'm different. And I know that because it's not just the way I feel when I'm in love, but it's the way I'm in the world with other people in my life too. Right. So I think that that's the part where I think it's like a really smart and great way to like, I don't know, like put some like coal mines on the page. Right. And here's our canary, like seeing kind of where they are with things. I think it's great. I mean, I also think it's great. Like one of my favorite, this is like a very small moment is in Lothair. Ellie has younger siblings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways we like really know Lothair has changed is when he agrees to take like her little cousins or something. I guess maybe they're cousins, like trick or treating. And you're like, oh, this man has changed, right? Like he's hanging out with your younger, family members. So I think like that's it. It's like we get to see a lot of that. Like a static thing has been pushed upon in a lot of ways, and we get to see that. So let's start off maybe by talking about I will say, as I was doing this, I found the most memorable ones for me were the ones where people had an uninvolved or even a hostile sibling relationship. Those were the ones I will say that ended up like when I was sort of like making my list, being like, oh yeah, that's a good example, or oh yeah, that's a good example. I don't know if you have the same, because like the good ones where they all love each other, like, okay, great. You know what I mean? It's not doing that same sort of work, right? So I have a couple in that bucket. I don't know if you do. Actually, I think most of mine are in that bucket. One I just want to name check is because I don't remember the name of it. That Tiffany Rice Thanksgiving book.
Yeah, we love
Right?
that book.
We love that book. So we've mentioned it a bunch of times, but
Her Naughty Holiday.
her,
Yes?
yeah.
Is that right?
Sure.
I just pulled that out of my head. That's probably wrong. Let's see. I'm never right. So
You're going to look down and see it. But Clover Green has these two siblings, Hunter and Kelly, and she is the oddball out, right, in her family. And it all comes to a head at Thanksgiving dinner when they come without their kids and to her house, and she is devastated. Like she's just like, God, they think I'm, and it's like this, and she ends up having this like kind of knock him down, drag him out with her siblings, and the hero stands up for her and kicks, and she's like, everybody gets out, and he's like, all right, everybody, let's go, including me. And it's a great, great example of like sort of the judgment that younger siblings feel. And I think like a corollary to that one that I think about a lot in that way is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. And in this one, she's a clown, right? Like, but she's really young, like, right? I think she's like 21 or 22 or like under 25, but she like her family owns a construction firm or whatever. So she's like bought her own house and the beginning of the book is like, she's like, I'm going to hold brunch for the family. And like everybody blows it off. Everybody forgets except the hero. Right. And it's really another, like, she's very, and so ostensibly it's sort of like framed as like, this is best friends like sibling, or this is my best friend's sibling, whatever. I just, yeah, because it's her older brother's best friend. But really, a lot of the book is, I think her name's Georgie, is her figuring out for herself, like, I don't have to be what my family thinks I am, right? I don't have to live up or live down to their expectations. I don't, like, they teased me. I was always on the outside looking in because she's a little bit younger than the older two that are kind of closer in age. And I always thought that was like really an unsung part of that, is like sometimes best friends, brother's best friend or whatever, is really just about like, I don't know, the patriarchy, right? Like him being like, where are you? You can't date my sister. And some of that happens, but like there's a really great development of like her as as independent from her family's judgment of her in that book as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think this estranged brother, or not estranged, but like overbearing, like difficult siblings who are not who are disconnected in some way, I agree, is a really good start. I also want to name check the Roth brothers here.
Oh yeah, great. Perfect.
Because I think this is, I mean, the one thing we've talked about this before, but like the value, possibly the greatest value of paranormal romance, is that you can dial everything to 11 and like readers will believe it, right? So I might, like I might have written a brother who like who has betrayed, or ostensibly has betrayed his brothers and sister, or his brothers from the jump, and it's a complex situation, but I cannot have turned them into vampires. And that is what happens in the Roth brothers series, like the small series within Immortals After Dark by Cressley Cole. So this series is, there are 4. There are 3 and then a novella. And the hero, the first one, wait, which one is the one who turned them? Is it Nikolai who turns all the others?
Right. Okay. Yeah. And they're furious at him. Right.
So one of them, so they were all like warlords. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Jen's fave.
Warlord. Well, like,
Jen loves a warlord. Hard eyes.
I know, it's so wrong.
Anyway, they were all whatever they were, right? And they all, like, one after another, they were all nearly dead on a battlefield. And one of them had the opportunity to turn all of them into vampires. And so he does. He makes the choice for all of them. He removes consent from all of them. And they fucking hate him.
They're so mad. Yeah.
They hate him. And then, so what is interesting is over the course of the 4 stories, they sort of like come to acknowledge that he has given them something of a gift, right? The gift of immortality, so they could find their fated mates, so that, whatever the things are. And so this also includes my favorite of this series, which is a place where I think you could enter IAD, is Dark Needs at Night's Edge. I also think this is like a really good sibling book, because the hero Conrad is essentially like, he's drunk on blood. Like he's addicted to blood as a vampire, and he is drunk. He is through the context of the book, like the setup of the book, of the whole series, is if a vampire drinks somebody to death, they drink like their memories, and if you do it too many times, you will go crazy. And so Conrad has gone like fully crazy. And so they decide they're going to dry him out, and they chain him to a heater, like a bed, and a heater in like a rundown New Orleans like house. And that house happens to be haunted by the ghost of, a 20-something-year-old ballerina who was killed, in the 1920s. And he sees her, like he can hear her. He he can see her and no one else ever has. And so it's like, he thinks he's maybe crazy. There's some really interesting tense, like the actual writing of this book is really great. But most importantly, sibling wise, like here are brothers who like, they chase him, they hunt him down, they collect him. Against his will, he's livid with them. He can't stand them for what they've done. And they do it for him, for his best interest. And as he falls in love with a ghost who they cannot see, you see them sort of racked with guilt about not having been able to get to him soon enough. Like it was their burden to bear. Like they should have been better. And I think Cressley really does a beautiful thing there with like the sibling relationship and the way that we feel responsible for them, even when we don't necessarily like or spend time with them. And then if you do read those, you can go back to season 1 and we have lots of episodes for you about that. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Frederick Smith, author of One and Done.
Motivated, goal-driven, and eternally single, Dr. Taylor James has a big job ahead of him. He has a huge accreditation process to get his San Francisco University through, and this is gonna like really set him up to essentially like be one of the first openly queer and Black university presidents in the United States. So this is like a big get for him in terms of like his professional goals. So, but this is also a huge stressor. And so he has given himself 1 day a week to let loose with friends in San Francisco's famed historic gay district, the Castro District. And he's calling his Sunday Fun Day brunch. And there one day he meets Dustin Miller. They have an incredible night of passion without even realizing that Dustin, who is in town as a consultant and project manager, is going to be someone working with him on this accreditation process. So Dustin, of course, has his own issues, right? He was the first in his family to finish college, and like sort of move away, kind of like to really make sure that he could, like kind of live the life he wanted and not fall into those old roles with his family. And so there's a lot of complex, complicated family stuff happening for Dustin at the same time that Taylor is juggling big career stuff. So this one night of passion, is it going to be them turn into them living out there forever, or are they going to leave it at one and done?
I bet I know what they're going to do. This one's for anyone who loves a hidden identity romance, a close proximity romance, an office romance, rivals to lovers, lust at first sight, only one bed, forbidden love, men with tattoos, men over 40. If you love really any of that, and who doesn't, this one's for you. You can buy One and Done in print or ebook. And if your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now and head over and buy the book. Thanks to Frederick Smith for sponsoring this week's episode.
I have a kind of a big one to talk about, if that's okay. So everybody has heard me say that I really love the Everything I Left Unsaid series by Molly O'Keefe. And what I want to talk about the sibling relationships in this book today, because I think the easiest way to think about it, okay, there's 4 books, but maybe the easiest way to think about it is having like the things that tie them together is the main character in books 1 and 2 is a guy named Dylan. And Dylan has an estranged brother who is the hero of book 3. And his name is Max. And Max is a like in a motorcycle club, and just like you're kind of like, wait, what is going on between these two? And then the third man, who's the hero of book 4. So Max's book is called Burn Down the Night. And then the 4th book is called Wait for It. And that guy, his name is Blake, is like essentially like Dylan's business partner. So and here's the part that's like really interesting as I was thinking about this morning. one of the things that's true for both Dylan's book and Max's books, like they're just like at loggerheads. They haven't seen each other in years. They're like really, really estranged from each other. Is that in Max's book, which is like I said called Burn Down the Night, his heroine essentially is named Joan, and then he finds out later that that's actually like a pseudonym, but like she has basically done everything to save her sister, who has been trapped by like this cult leader. And it's really illuminating for like Max to kind of be like, why will this woman do everything for her sibling and Dylan and I basically don't even talk, right? So something about like their like the just how intensely she is like willing to do anything for her sister is like how little he will do for his brother. So like there's a really interesting kind of like funhouse mirror effect that's happening in that book where you're trying like in those books where you're trying to figure out like right. And so one of the things at the end of Max's book that I always really loved is like one of my like favorite lines in romance, believe it or not, is he's like walking into like a Christmas party and we see like an old friend, like so we get Blake coming out, right? And he's just kind of been a dickhead in the background. Like Max has never liked him. He's just like whatever. And Max like says something essentially like the animal in me could smell the animal in him.
Mhm.
Like, even though this guy was real buttoned up and real suity, you know what I mean? And Max is like anything but, he could tell like just how on the edge this guy was. And in his book, and this is the one I has like a lot of backstory for me wanting to talk about the fourth book, which is like a book. I was like, okay, sure, I'll read Blake's book, but he's such a jerk. And it has been a favorite for a long time. I reread it often. Blake has a brother who was physically abusive to his wife and his kids. And that's like Tiffany. And he actually ends up getting together with Tiffany in his book. But the part that is really unforgivable, and I think about this a lot because I don't think people have the nerve for this anymore, is that Blake knew that Tiffany and Phil had kids and didn't tell his mother. So he has been keeping a secret and essentially, like, if I remember correctly, paid Phil off. Don't tell mom about the kids. Because he knew that like Phil would essentially use it as a way to like get at Blake's money or to get at their mom's heart, like just like and so a big part of the book is Blake essentially having to come to terms with the fact that he kept like his mother's grandkids from her in this like really ill-advised effort to protect her from Phil. And I know that was like really complicated and lots of names, everybody, but like when I think about like how truly complex the relationships are between siblings in those books, I think it's like and it's totally like it's infrastructure. Like I really had to sort of think about it. It is not like the mainline thing, but like this is an example. If like there's been a lot of conversations online this week about like, you know, world building and contemporaries. Like read these 4 books, everybody, and you will see the intense amount of world building that goes on at a cellular level for these characters, because it's like who they were in their families of origin and what they're bringing out into the world. But it's really, really good. So it's kind of like, how did I treat my brother? And what does it mean when my brother's best friend becomes more important to him than I am? And do I have a place for this anymore? And I mean, it's just like every single one of them is really dealing with like this question of like, how is my relationship with my sibling driving a lot of like the ways I operate in the world? It's amazing. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I think the complexity of that, I mean, that's just a series that is,
Yeah,
it's perfectly built.
it's perfectly built, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have, oh God, I have a lot of brothers on my list. I want to talk about the use of brothers and mainly brothers, in mafia romance. Because I think that is a really particular kind of use of family. And I want to talk about Annika Martin's
Oh, yes,
dark
Sarah.
mafia prince, who
Taking the
everybody knows I'm
finger.
like so obsessed with this series. Okay, so the structure of this series is that they're like, I don't know, they're not Russian, but they're like Eastern Bloc. It's like Eastern Bloc mafia. And there's like a prophecy that the three of them will rule together. Like only when the three of them get, like, when the three brothers are finally like united, will they be able to like dominate,
I love it. Of
right?
course.
But
Of
there's
course.
a missing brother, like, one of them gone missing, and through the whole thing, there's kind of this, like, thread of there's, like, a villain who in the first book, there's a villain who the theory is, like, he was involved, he was friends with their father, and, like, he betrayed a classic mafia shit, right? Like,
Sure.
mafia reasons, romance mafia reasons. The father knew, father's was betrayed by his friend, and the friend sent the brother away, or, like, knows where the brother is, whatever. So these other two, the heroes of the first two books in the series, get together and they like kind of hate each other, but like they're like not like super duper close, but they like are working together, and they kind of decide that what they're going to do is take down this dude, the bad guy, and then torture him essentially into revealing where the third brother is. Because in order for, kind of less because they want the third brother back, and more because they just want the like dominion, right? These are not men with feelings. And so they go they go and they find the man who was like around when they were young, and he has this like hot daughter now. And right before they're sort of prepared to like destroy this man, he's like, wait a second. The hero of the first one is like, hang on a second. What if, hear me out, instead of destroying this man and figuring out right away where our brother is, we just take the daughter? Like, what if I just take her and then we use her as a tool to get to the dad? Except, of course, he's a big dummy because he's like kind of been into her since they were kids, and she was so pretty when they were kids, and she smells so good, whatever, whatever. And they end up kind of like, she's his captive. But you guys, this is not like dark mafia romance. This is like true mafia, straight down the middle mafia romance. This is before dark romance became a thing. And so she's like, I remember you from when we were kids, but you're nothing like, the happy person who you were then. Oh, it's just brutal. And then finally, the middle brother is like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, you can't just be like roaming around making moon eyes over this girl. And there's this great scene that I think about this scene. I mean, it is my Roman Empire, where like finally the brother is like, I am gonna fucking handle this. And he's like, we're gonna here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna cut off her pinky finger and we're gonna send it to her dad. And the dad is gonna know we mean business, right? So now of course I could be making this up, but I don't think I am, because please. I'm pretty sure he locks his brother in the trunk of his car to make sure he can't do anything. And he sends out like one of his lieutenants to go to Staples to get a paper cutter. And then he sits down with the heroine, and he pours her a shot of vodka, and he's like, drink this. And she's like, oh, no, I don't drink. And he's like, I promise you are going to want to have drunk this. And then he gets her like a little bit tipsy on vodka, and then in comes the paper cutter, and the brother is like, all right, we're going to do this thing. And of course the hero has like gotten himself out of the trunk of the car. Like, he comes in like feral. It's fucking great, and saves her finger. And then also, like, but there's this moment where the brother like kind of like is like, you want this girl. Like, this girl she's your mate. And it's pretty great. And also great in the sense that, like, this guy it tees up the second book because you're like, oh no, this guy's crazy. Like, he was gonna do it. There was no, if the brother hadn't turned up, like, if the hero hadn't turned up, that finger was fucking going. It was coming off. And so, like, I mean, again, my faves are problematic, but I was like, now tell me about this guy. And then, of course, and listen, everybody, spoiler alert, but in the third one, they find out that the third brother has basically been, like, raised by wolves in the woods. Like, he literally has been feral for his whole life. So, I mean, classic. And here they are. And then they go looking for him. And so each one is really threaded through with this, like, brotherhood of men. So that's Annika Martin's Dark Mafia Prince. And then the other two.
Yeah, this series is amazing for
sure. Second one is Wicked Mafia Prince. The third one's Savage Mafia Prince.
Yeah, he literally is just like, was like, when we say raised by wolves, we like literally mean it. Like, you're choosing the man or the bear. That's the same thing in that book.
Exactly. He is the bear.
He is the bear. That's fine. It is the fine. Amazing.
And he's not like recovered. It's not like that other one where he was raised, like, he was like, you know, had gone feral in the woods, where he comes back and he's like suave. This one, he comes back and they immediately put him into an institution because they're like, well, he's the bear.
He's the bear. He's been raised by wolves. What are you going to
do? Then like the heroine in that one is a reporter, and she like Nellie Bly's her way into this institution. No notes. This is what I want from romance.
Romance is unmatched, everybody.
If you can dream it, we can write it. And that is what is important. There, that's the t-shirt.
There you go. Exactly. That's exactly right. I have one more. A series that is tied together by like a mixed group of siblings, right? Brothers and sisters. Which is I put the Jackson Falls series by Cynthia Williams. I put one of them, I think Careless Whispers on the like a best of the year, maybe a couple years ago. And in this series, one of the things that I think is in historical, it's about like inheritance and title. But in a lot of modern contemporary romances, it's about inheritance, right? Like, essentially, right? Like, or there's like a family business or something. There's like some sort of sticking point sometimes in that way. And in this series, the Robideau family owns actually a tobacco company. And, you know, this is incredibly profitable, and she is in the book I really like. Elena is essentially like has been the perfect daughter her entire life, so that she could, because she wants to inherit, like, run the business one day, but her father won't let her because she's not a man. Right. And at some point, you know, so she essentially has been like locked down and kept it tight her entire life because she knew that that's what her father like would respect and admire in like, or has told her. Right. And yet, essentially, at some point in the book, he like loses his mind and it's just like, forget about it. Like, I'm firing you. You're never going to inherit. You're never going to run the business. Right. Like, it just can't be. It has to be a son or it has to be a man. And there's a really like tender and memorable scene to me where she goes to her brother, who's a politician. And it's like one of these things where, like, kind of low key, she has been comparing herself to her brothers her entire life. She couldn't help but do it. And her brother in the book is just like, that was really unfair. Dad shouldn't have done that. And it was like a really like, and I think it speaks more to like you know, like that great moment of like, you know, your siblings kind of coming in clutch and saying the exact right thing when you needed them to. And I think that there's a lot of like that in this series, the repair work and like the closeness being built is between the siblings, and like the dad essentially gets like cut out of it. You know what I mean? And I think like that's one of the things that we often see is like tension among parents. Um, it's really hard. It's really hard, I think, for uh, romance authors not to want to fix that. And I think it's especially true in like queer romance. Like, you don't, you know what I mean? Like, going back to your family of origin, or like, like making up with your parents who were so terrible to you, or who kicked you out of the house, or who won't accept you for who you are, isn't the goal, right? And that's why found family is so important in some ways. But I think in this case, like this series is like, it's all MF romance, but it's not like we're going to fix dad. It's like we are going to like be strong together as siblings, and then dad won't matter. And right, especially in this book, because it's so clear that that it was unfair, right? That it was like, here's someone who's sort of internalized the message. Elena has internalized the message her entire life. Just like act cold and aloof and, be perfect, and I will give you this company, and it still doesn't happen. And then she really has to like think to herself, well, wait, if that's, who am I then? What do I want? And I think it's like this is the reason I put it on the list, because I think it's such an amazing journey that she goes on, and really felt very real to me. Like, who are you once you let go of like pleasing your parents' expectations?
What I like about that is it's sort of this sense of their parents aren't evil. They're just,
Yeah, right. They're just parents.
and I think that romance can often fall into the trap of like evil parents. We've talked about this a million times on the podcast. But I think that one of the things that I think about a lot when I think about siblings in romance is, and siblings in general in the world, right, is this sense of like, you are the only people who really understand like where you come from. And you can, have a partner who's so understanding and knows your family, but like ultimately back in the day, it was just you guys in a building together, right? So I think that there's something, what is fascinating to me in romance, especially in books like Gorilla Twins or whatever, is the specter of that, is the way that the past kind of is always present, right? There's this constant sense of like, my responsibility to you comes from whatever the background is between us, like from like the fact that we all came up through the same fire. We were forged in the same fire. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Avon Books, publishers of Alexandria Bellaflour's Truly, Madly, Deeply.
Best-selling romance novelist Truly Livingston is an expert on happily ever afters, or so everyone thinks. She's even signed on to record a podcast sharing relationship advice, but she feels like a real imposter, right? Her parents have just announced they're separating. She caught her own fiance cheating, and her view on love is in the dumps, right? And so she's hoping this podcast will be a great distraction and let her rediscover everything she loves about love. Her co-host, Colin McCory, is a divorce lawyer, and
Perfect.
she thinks he's hot. Sparks seem to fly, but the bad kind of sparks, because he's also been a real jerk to her. So she's just, what a terrible experience. But a few days later, Truly is surprised when Colin tracks her down, asking for a fresh start. She loves that he's begging a little bit, and these two go from enemies to friends to something else entirely. Maybe she was wrong and he's not cynical, but maybe there is something truly, madly, deeply about in the future for them.
This one is perfect for anybody who loves a rivals to lovers story, or a antagonists to lovers story. Alexandra writes great large casts of characters that are, many of whom are queer. He falls first in this one. If you love a rom-com, that's Alexandra's whole world. So if you are interested in reading Truly, Madly, Deeply, you can do that in print, ebook, or audiobook. And if you If your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. Thanks to Avon Books and Alexandria Bellafleur for sponsoring this week's episode. So I'm thinking about Love Will Always Remember, Tracy Livesey's book, where the hero, the sibling actually isn't on the page, but he is the inciting incident of this book. So this is an amnesia romance. So Leighton, the heroine, is like not prior to her. So this book does a lot of like amnesia work too. Like the amnesia trope is the most important trope in here, because when Leighton was knocked unconscious, or honestly, I don't remember what happened to her, but like she's hit by a car, maybe, I can't remember, but she was like not a great person. She's like a lobbyist, a high-powered lobbyist. She like wasn't very nice, and she gets knocked unconscious. She is engaged to a guy who's like also in finance. And when she wakes up, and the brother, so he is like has to go on a business trip. Like these are not decent people. And like he's like, oh, she's in the hospital, and she's gonna wake up, and I need you. He calls his brother, who is a chef, Jonathan, and he says, I need you to go and pretend to be her fiance. Like it's a little what's that movie with Sandra Bullock and the Christmas movie?
Oh yeah, the While You Were Sleeping.
While You Were Sleeping. And so he's like, I need you to just go in there and like pretend to be her fiance while I go. Oh, I just got to do a quick thing. I'll be back. Right. So, they like, but they're like not really in the Tracy really threads the needle here, because like the Leighton and the brother are not like super into each other. It's like really a business arrangement. Like it's just good for business that the two of them end up together. And so he goes away, and Jonathan goes in, and she has no memory of like any of this, like of the deal, of who her fiance was, anything. And so he's basically like, I'm your fiance, or like through whatever. She believes he's her fiance, and then like they start to fall for each other. And he's always been attracted to her, but like he starts to fall for like new amnesiac Leighton.
Right, exactly.
Right?
She's someone different, right?
Exactly. The doctors have he's like, I don't think I should tell you, like, I think I should tell her the truth. And the doctors are like, you can't, because you'll shock her. And like, I mean, it's all sort of it's great. It's real romancy here. Right. And so honestly, like there's this like great amnesia romance, but also this kind of real sense that Jonathan is like doing his brother a favor, because that's what brothers do. Like that's what siblings do. Like you need a shovel, you have a dead body, I have a shovel, right? And I think that what's interesting here is Tracy in this book kind of handles this like the like minefield of sibling relationship here, where like Jonathan doesn't really want to do it, and when he does it because he's like hot for Leighton, but like then he's like down the rabbit hole, and it's all sticky and complex, and he's really only in it because of the brother relationship, a brother who he doesn't super love, but like, I mean, who he loves, but who he doesn't super like. And so there's this kind of sense of like, what are our responsibilities to our siblings, and how deep in the muck are we willing to get for them? And this makes me think about, I just want to name check preferential treatment here, right?
Yes, I thought of this one too. Yeah.
So this is sisters, but again, this kind of like, how deep in the muck are we going to get for our siblings? Like, what is the level of responsibility? At what point are our responsibilities to our siblings, like kind of extended too far? And like we did for preferential treatment as a deep dive this season, so I'm not gonna get into it very much. But the heroine of that book, like she has a sister who is very needy. She needs, and like financial help. She needs support.
And raised in an abusive home, like one makes it out and one kind of doesn't, right?
And she feels very responsible for that. in a lot of ways, and then simultaneously feels like, but I can't bear this burden forever. Like, I think what Heather Guerrero does in Preferential Treatment, and like what Tracy, listen, this is an amnesia romance. It's like a way, it's much more like, it's a lighter, more fun read than than Preferential Treatment. But like what both of these authors are doing in these books is sort of thinking to themselves, like, what is the burden of the sibling relationship? How far should it go? And like, what kind of mess can it bring to our door? And in Tracy's world, it's a very delightful mess of like, here's a woman who I am going to fall in love with. But in Heather's book, it's like, at what point at what point do I let go of my guilt around my siblings?
Well, and it's interesting because I was thinking about Preferential Treatment as being sort of again, like that funhouse mirror effect to Wait For It by Molly O'Keefe, where like he really had successfully cut Phil and Phil's kids like out of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And then what he finds is like, is there a way for Tiffany and the kids to come back in? Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in Heather Guerrero's case in Preferential Treatment, it's not. It's like, that's my sister, right? It's not like, what if this, you know what I mean? So it's just like it's really interesting. It's really interesting to think about some of those books in terms of like the pressure that can put on you.
I mean,
Yeah, to like save someone who, it's like, can I save them without like falling in that back into that myself, right? Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that Preferential Treatment delivers that I really love in a sibling romance is the moment where the love interest goes to the sibling to understand, right?
Yes.
Like,
yes,
I don't understand where you have been. So can you explain it to me?
Yeah.
And I think that is I love that. I love that moment in a romance where like a protagonist a love interest goes to someone else to understand, but it's a particular kind of scene and a really powerful one when they go to a sibling, because again, I understand every one of her buttons.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I feel like it's underutilized in some ways. I think it's a lot more common for like a family member to go to that person and being like, you're fucking this all up. What are you doing? But to go as a supplicant, right? To say, I'm wrong. I can't figure out how to make it right.
How do I fix it?
Right. How do I fix it? How do I get there? I think that's like that's really, really interesting. Another book I've talked about this like in a lot of ways. It's been a book that has like really sort of stuck with me is I think Susan Elizabeth Phillips writes a lot of really interesting sibling relationships. And in Simply the Best, which was her most recent one, the main character's her younger stepbrother is a NFL star, and she's like sort of floundering, and there's like a lot of unresolved family issues around her stepmother that come to bear. But even like when I think about Nobody's Baby But Mine, right? It's like Cal's brother and like them around. Right? I mean, so I think that there's a lot of, I think it's interesting to me. It was interesting. I enjoyed thinking about these books in a way that I sort of didn't expect.
Yeah,
right.
Same.
And like the work it could do for showing the main character's growth arc. It really was fun for me to think about. Yeah.
I want to talk about Naima Simone, Scoring with the Wrong Twin. We did a twin episode, and I'm sure we talked about this book then because it's one of my very favorites of Naima's. Naima is also a twin. So I think like twins are particularly unique characters. I mean, I love a twin, but I am not a twin. And so I think like when you read books by twins about twins, the like representation is top notch. But Scoring with the Wrong Twin kind of covers this kind of living in a sibling shadow piece.
Yeah. Right.
The setup is the heroine is her twin sister is a supermodel. She grew up with like some real body images. She was never the like pretty twin. She was never the like, she was overweight. She sort of struggled with a lot of body
Like the
stuff.
ugly duckling type stuff, like
Yeah,
typically, yeah.
but they are like identical. And so, as they aged, like they now look the same largely. And her sister is basically like, I need your help. Again, a real, I need your help. I need you to do me a favor. I need you to go do this photo shoot with this NFL player. Um, and pretend you're me. Like, you have to pretend you're me because, like, this is my career. And so she's like, okay, my twin, my sister is in trouble, and this is what sisters do. And she goes and she does this thing, and she hates every second of it. But like, the hero, who is this like hot football player, is like, oh, I met this supermodel once before, and I didn't care for her.
Yeah,
Like, she
right.
was standoffish and like snooty, but now she's like friendly and kind of cute, and
Awesome. And
I
yeah,
really like
right.
love her. And then they like go out, and she pretends to be her sister the whole time because she doesn't want to ruin her sister's like career. And then by the time it's like clear that she could tell the truth, it just feels like she's
Late,
just like,
yeah, right.
um, and I think that again, it's kind of that like down the rabbit hole of like, what am I willing to do? What is the burden of sibling here? Like, at what point do I get to live my life in this? Um, and I really love that because I think what it really does, I think the sibling relationship is like no other relationship. Um, in that when you get to a place where it is very hard to say no to your siblings. It's like you grow up learning to say no, practicing saying no to your parents, right? But like ultimately there is that sort of sense of like, well, I can't say no to them. Like these people who were forged in my fire. Um and so I really love that because I don't actually think I think there is, and I think this is why, like little sisters needing to come out in society, right, is such a classic in historicals, because like it makes sense that like there would be a responsibility to each other.
I don't know, Sarah, you just can't say no to your siblings. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, you just can't. It's the rule.
It's the rule. Can I talk about the Baylor sisters?
Please.
So I have talked about the Hidden Legacy series a lot, right? And I often talk about like the first three, which is like Nevada and Mad Rogan, because they're my favorite. But the second series is all Catalina, and Catalina is the younger sister of Nevada. And she's really one who's like lived in her sister's shadow. And there's like a couple reasons for that. One is just that like she was like super shy, like really introverted and shy. But also because of her magic, she essentially has like siren magic. So people are really attracted to her. But like as a child, she had to like hold that all in because like a nurse tried to kidnap her from the hospital, and you know what I mean? Like there's all of these like ways in which that was really dangerous. And so whereas, so for Catalina, it's like, and she's also the middle sister, right? And one of the things that was really interesting, I was interested in terms of this series, is I was like, how are you going to make someone who is like kind of young and shy and all that stuff, how are you going to like levitate her and like make her the next heroine? And the really smart thing that I think happens in romance is like, well, you have all the time in the world, right? Now it's just 3 years later. Now it's, you know what I mean? And so you can play around with like what are the things that could happen to a person to like age them up and then make them right able to like kind of hold their own now in the family in a way they couldn't before. At the same time, the third sister is Arabella, and it's really funny, I joked about the bear earlier. There's a big hint that she actually might have a bear shifter be the guy she falls in love with? Hard to tell. I was like, now I hope so. But also they have some cousins, like their first cousins are also part of the book, and there's like two brothers. And it's like that
Mhm.
same profile where like Leon feels so like I'm never going to figure out what my magic is, and as opposed to his older brother who is like so settled. So I think that that is like a series that really plays around very explicitly with like what it means to be the younger sibling of a really high functioning, like everybody loves kind of older sibling, and how that's different for both, like how that's different for different gendered people, right? Like what does it mean to have older sisters who are really capable? What does it
Right.
mean to have older brothers who are really capable? And I really like that, because I do think that, you know, like there's archetypes about like older siblings and younger siblings for a reason, right? And I'll be really interested to see like when they do Arabella's book, if it's they better do Arabella's books, everybody. I mean, I don't want to be a person who's like, they better, but like they better. But like the baby, right? Like, what if you're like the spoiled baby? You know what I mean? And how does that play out? So I've like mentioned those books a million times. I think I don't want to belabor it, but like if you're interested in a big long series, there's 3 books for each like couple, but like lots of really interesting sibling stuff.
So this makes me think of um, overbearing brothers.
Mm,
And it makes me think of like big family romances. Like,
yeah.
and I think like you can't really talk about this relationship, this sibling relationship, without talking about the overbearing brother, which gets tied
Yeah.
up a little bit in
Right.
you know,
Sibling's best friend or
yeah,
whatever, right? That kind
whatever,
of, yeah,
fine.
right.
But I want to talk about series where there should be a where there either is a family tree in the beginning of the book
Or there
or
could be.
there should be. So, I mean, the obvious one here, and I think the first time I ever actually interacted with a family tree in a romance novel is the Sinster books. I will I'm I mean, that Sinster I literally pulled it up before we started recording today because I have since then not I can't think of another really a series where the family tree is right there at the start and it's important. But I can remember every time I opened a new Stephanie Lawrence book looking at that family tree and thinking, I want to like dig into this. Because the Sinsters in my head are cousins, but they're actually 2 sets of brothers. All right, it could be 3 sets. So Devil Sinster, who is the one to rule them all, um, who we did, that's the devil, that's
Devil's Bride. Yeah.
Devil's Bride. He's the Duke of St. Ives, and he is, a corner, a cornerstone text for us, for both of us as readers. So his brother, they all have these nicknames. His brother is Scandal, who's book 3 in that series. So, Scandal's book is a Scandal's Bride, which honestly, can I tell you, the other useful thing about putting a family tree at the beginning of your book is I can go through and make sure I've read all these books, everyone. I don't understand what the problem is. Publishers, get it together.
Well, I mean, if you're self-publishing, I feel like please include it. We
Just
love
put
it.
it right there in the beginning. We love it so much. I am gonna put a link to this family tree from Stephanie Lawrence's website. Stephanie Lawrence is so organized in a way that I am not. But there are now I know, I didn't know, there are 20 books in this Sinster series. And each one of them is marked on this beautiful family tree that's on her website. So it's actually, I'm looking right now, it is one. So Scandal is his half brother. Scandal is obviously the Scandal. He's the bastard brother. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of siblings all together as cousins, and then their offspring. And it's a delight. It's a delight. And yeah, So them. And then I want to also talk about, I just want to name check the Mallorys, because Gentle Rogue is structured where there are 5 siblings and 4 overbearing older brothers. And they are just pissed
all the time.
Exactly. And those are the Andersons. So the Anderson brothers, there are 4 older brothers of the Andersons, and then there's James Mallory. And there is a great, Georgiana is their baby sister, and James Mallory is a pirate. And James and Georgiana are the hero and heroine of Gentle Rogue, which is also a cornerstone text for us. We did a deep dive on both of these books, Devil's Bride and Gentle Rogue, in season 2. But that this is where the hardwired, like, brothers coming to threaten the hero.
Yeah, that's where the plug. That's where it got installed.
That's where that one got installed, and that is repeated. That is a classic, of course, through time. And yes, probably like full of patriarchy. Don't at me. But also that's what I know people really love about Bridgerton books too. There's that sort of sense in the Duke and I, when all the Bridgerton boys like come to protect Daphne.
And I think the smart move then is in the second book that Anthony, it's like Kate has a younger sister who is like Edwina, who's like the diamond of the first water, who he's supposed to marry, and then he can't figure out why he wants Kate instead. Right. And so it's also really smart, I think, in the books, just like sort of immediately like flip to, okay, like now let's look at these sisters, because or let's look at another sibling, kind of relationship in the heroine's part. I have one more big serious thing I want to talk about that's like sort of foundational. I've been saving till the end. I didn't know if I should talk about it, but now that we're kind of just like talking about like the foundational.
I have one more foundational family too. So you go and then I'll go.
Okay, so I've talked about these books before, and you guys, I'm sorry, because you're not going to be able to buy them unless you're like looking for them on eBay. But a really the foundational sibling series for me was Barbara Boswell's Brady series. I've talked about these people a lot because I was fascinated by this as a kid. The series is that a group of West Virginia sisters fall in love with so the first book is like this magnate, like a mall magnate. He like they own a mall, comes from Houston to like find like land and like kind of near their home, and like falls in love with her, and like but then leaves her, and he comes back, and then the whole family kind of moves to Houston, and all of the sisters fall in love with all the brothers. But I think the thing that is, which I like just thought was like the greatest thing ever, and honestly, I still do, everybody. But one of the things that was really interesting to me in thinking about it this morning was that it does a really good job of like, again, every single possible relationship gets like unpacked because it's so long running. And one of the things that I think is really the greatest about this is like when you have a long running series that's really tightly woven together like this, like you get to sort of like show the evolution of like secondary characters as well. So for example, in the first book, it's Siobhan is the sister, right? And she gets together with, I can't remember his name, doesn't matter. Okay, in the second book, this guy's own brother is going to get together with Siobhan's sister, Erin, or a later book. Mm-hmm. And it's like, then you're like, wait, I know what a jackass my own brother is. And now he is dating my wife's sister. And do I have to like, now I'm torn right between like, Perfect. Right. It's great. Perfect. And then of course, like the Ramseys is like the Houston Mall family. They have a sister who, again, even though she's really smart and really capable, she's just like supposed to be daddy's girl. And she's like, no, I can work for the company too. Right. So she gets a book where she has to really prove to her overbearing brothers and father what she can do, which is, again, real classic in romance. And then the greatest book is called The Last Brady, when the youngest siblings essentially a side story is like the youngest siblings run away together to get married, and all the older siblings are outraged by it because they think they're too young. And so it's like you get like the full like impact of like the not just like how these two families interact with each other, but like the as they get woven tighter together, like how it becomes its own thing. And honestly, like I when I like discovered that like you could buy used books on the internet, these were the first used books that I went to just I was like, I must have them. I must have them. And I've reread them because they're fucking great. So yeah, I love those.
So the other brothers who I think are really fun, and I think you can't talk about like families in romance without talking about the Levesques,
Mm-hmm.
Beverly Jenkins Levesque series. So, and what and I want to talk about what I think Bev has done really cleverly in terms of the writing of this series. So um the Levesque series is multi-generational. And then um so in the first round of the Levesques, we meet Dominic and Claire, who are the hero and heroine of Captured, which is a pirate romance.
Pirate romance.
Very
I was like,
exciting.
it's pirates, everybody.
And they are the great grandparents. So then there's Through the Storm, which is Sable and Raymond Levesque. And then there is Winds of the Storm. And they are Winds of the Storm is hang on. Amazing. I love it already. I'm getting to a point. It's just taking me a while. Right. So then there's Winds of the Storm, and that's the like this cover is like perfect. It's like a classic old school clinch. And so this Winds of the Storm is Archer and Zara. Um and so what's happening here is there are so what that and then there's so she wrote the first one. Okay, the first one in this series is Through the Storm, and that is a brother with Winds of the, those are related. That is one generation, Through the Storm and Winds of the Storm. And then she wrote Captured, which is the great grandparents, the pirate ship book.
Yeah.
And
That's what I
then
love. Right.
so then that was all done, and those all happened in like the early aughts. And then she recently wrote Rebel, where she came back to the series. She wrote like a more modern version where she wrote the essentially like the middle brother of books 1 and 2. And so really smartly came back to the series, placed a new Levesque into the world, and brought new Beverly Jenkins readers back
Back.
to
So
this like
smart.
really like swashbuckling, truly like adventure. This is an adventure series, this series. And like again, all the classic hallmarks of a Beverly Jenkins series where like it's set against the Civil War. There's like Reconstruction era stuff going on here. And so but also like just every emotion just dialed up. These characters are so memorable, and this family lives on through her contemporary romances, where you can see it's sort of the premise of historicals is that they will never die, and of course they do because they're not immortal. But like what Bev has done is given us then a contemporary world where everybody is still.
Yeah, right. And they like honor and like know about those like, historical people that like were so amazing. Yeah, it's
Like the DNA passes down, and it's really, really beautiful. And anyway, you'll love it. So, but then the brother piece of this is really interesting. And I think when she writes Rebel, it really like heightens the sibling relationships because it's a middle child, and there's a
yeah.
lot going on in terms of like, I think also of returning to this original series and like reminding everybody of uh who they are and how they run together.
Right. That's amazing. It really is. I love it. Uh, yeah, I mean, when you start thinking about it, like there's some, right? And, like I said, some are just like, oh, yeah, that's my brother, right? Or whatever. But the ones where you really can see the evolution of the characters through their sibling relationships, I think it's just such a smart way of like advancing the plot. And I think it's also a smart way of like, and we've talked about this in modern contemporaries, like, right? Like, what are the things that could cause people to struggle to be together, and like, right, like having a sibling be the person who can show us, well, this is what this family is all about, right? Like, this is what this family is like, this is what it values. That can be like a powerful moment for a character. I mean, I think we've all had that, right? Like, who are these people? Sometimes you don't really see until you sit down at family dinner with them. And then you realize, it's a guy going off to Staples for a fucking, paper cutter.
Exactly. I mean, I
Finger
think
cutter.
that romance delivers though. The reason why siblings are so powerful in romance is because, like, again, the point of the romance is that these people learn to love us, warts and all, right? Like, and the warts part of it is often, it's all there. It's all written in the past. And like we've said a million times this episode, siblings know. Well,
a long one, Sarah.
I know you're about to go see your sibling, so
I am about to go see one of my siblings next week, which will be really fun for me. Yeah, I'll be in Cleveland, so let's see Eric. I already texted him and was like,
he didn't reply to us about our balloon.
Oh yeah,
this was something we talked about on the Patreon extra. If you join the Patreon, you get an extra banter episode every month. And on the Patreon, we talked about the 1986 Cleveland, Ohio balloon disaster. But he did not reply to us, so please check in with Eric about that.
I'll be like, what's going on? Here's the funny thing. I was like thinking too is like, we talk obviously every week about romance, but one of the things the Patreon has turned into, like those Banter Plus episodes, is like a place where we'll really have like a super boring craft discussion that I'm like, no one else would want to listen to this. And yet I enjoy having them, and our listeners on the Patreon do too. So everybody, if you want to hear us talk about, balloon disasters and craft issues, then apparently join our Patreon. That is the place it's happening.
You can find the Patreon information at patreon.com/fateofmates. You can also find us on Twitter at fateofmates, on Instagram at fateofmatespod. We're also on Blue Sky and Threads, and Eric's over there on Tumblr. And you can listen to every episode of the podcast on Wednesdays, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Sarah McLean. I'm here with my friend Jen Prokop, and we are Fated Mates. Tell us your favorite siblings in romance. We have forgotten a lot of them, or not forgotten them, but not spoken about, like Talia Hibbert's Brown sisters, and Eloisa James's Essex sisters, and I don't know, lots of other people who we're missing.
Penny Reed has a bunch of siblings, right? Like, we know they exist, everybody. Sorry.
Oh yeah, Piper Rains Baileys. If you love an interstitial about a trope, Piper Rains Baileys have definitely covered it. So there are so many series that we really love. Tell us who your favorites are wherever you interact with us. And next week we are reading Devil of Downtown, a sister romance. So head out and read that if you haven't done it already, and come back next week for the deep dive.